Good morning and welcome again to the Audit Committee. I think we have a full house. Any apologies?
Councillor Milligan
Milligan
will be here. I understand he's at another meeting at the moment. I understand he will be here, Chair.
Order of business, it will be proposed at the end that we give a formal thanks to Robert Ray, the independent member of the committee who has demitted office after his 3-year term, and we'll return to that after our business. Are there any declarations of interest? Could we look now at the minutes of the meeting of 10th December, pages 3 to 5? Are there any matters arising? Then may I move on? The annual audit report on pages 7 to 32. Can I ask Gary to talk to this?
This was the report that was presented to full council, so I think all of the members have had a chance to review the report, and I had presented it then. I don't intend to run through it, other than to say that I thought the summary from officers at the front of the report was very good. I wish I'd have written it as succinctly myself, but so it really is around financial pressures, leadership and so on. And the detail in the report, I think, speaks for itself, but happy to take any questions if members have any.
I'm sure there are good reasons, but we're looking at a report now almost a year since the end of the accounting period. Is there any way we can accelerate that in the future, apart from obviously not cancelling the January audit meeting?
Don't cancel the January audit meeting, I would say. The report timetable is that the report will be produced by the end of October. So it should be available for the Audit Committee either, I think, in November or December, if it's possible to timetable that.
Yeah, I think that matters because it's germane to the review of the transformation programme. We ourselves, of course, have our own reports on that. Councillor Bryant.
Sorry, Chair, I did mean to make one comment to Gary. On page 16, we're talking about the production of group accounts. I just wonder what that actually means.
That's covered in the audit plan, which is coming later. I mean, really what's happening there is police and fire are no longer the responsibility of councils. So they drop out of the group accounts, and the question then becomes whether there is anything material in the group structure, things like the valuation board, or I think there's a small subsidiary company. It's whether or not those are material enough to support preparation of group accounts going forward.
Thanks. Just perhaps by way of comment, obviously we did consider the report at the full council, and at that time made comment about the fact that a number of the points raised in here have more or less been superseded by the production of the financial strategy and agreement of the financial strategy of the council. So really now driving forward to tackle the financial challenges that are ahead of us, fully aware that it's not a simple and straightforward process, but also recognising the fact that significant steps have already been taken to identify the areas that we need to be looking at to meet the challenges that are outlined in the report.
That's very helpful. So in terms of the input of this committee, we're largely endorsing a debate that's already been had at Council. Are there any further questions?
So we're talking about the timing of it, Chair. When we get this report, is there an actual requirement for it to have gone through all the rest of the cycles before it comes here? You know, could it come here earlier for us to consider it in some detail, maybe even before it goes to the full council?
Gary?
I think that's the best practice approach. The report is a report to members. It is actually a report to council. But naturally, you would expect the audit committee to have the strongest interest in that report before it goes to council. And if it were possible to schedule timescales to enable that, I think that would be a best practice approach.
Since there has been a positive questions on this, I let me ask one that reveal that I don't quite understand it. On page 45, there's a table 1.2, estimates of the incremental impact of investment decisions on council tax and rents. This seems to indicate that we could drop council tax and we could drop rents, and that was a surprising conclusion because there's a negative. This is page 45, Appendix 2.
Is this the same report?
I hope so. Have I jumped ahead? So I'm mistaken that as a schedule to your report. I'm sorry. There were 5 recommendations at the back of it, and these are all have been taken on board.
Yes, so the management response is in the report, and we will be following that up as part of the audit cycle. So the next thing on the agenda is the audit plan. And one of the things we will be doing is reporting back to the committee during the course of the audit around progress that management are making against that action plan response.
So we will see that towards the end of this year.
Yes, so we have an interim piece of work which is ongoing, and we'll be reporting. We might not report on everything in our interim report, but by the end of the year we will have reported on all aspects of the management response follow-up.
Could we then move on to item 6, the external audit plan for 2013-14, which was sent separately?
Okay, this is the annual audit plan which sets out how we intend to approach the audit. It's split into a number of stages that you would expect, and it's probably worth talking through some of those stages. We start off with understanding the business, so what's the context for under which the audit takes place. You'll see on page 7 a very short analysis of some of the key factors that we think are important in undertaking the audit, and you can see how we're going to respond to those. So that's high-level, contextual, strategic issues within Midlothian, and we've got financial reporting, legislation, corporate governance, and some other requirements around there, around some changes in relation to benchmarking indicators, for example. Over the page, we set out how we address that, and we've got the different stages of our work, which is set out on page 8. Really, I probably want to take you on to page 9 and 10. And what page 9 and 10 do is they split the audit into the individual transaction cycles of the council, and it then says what the external audit risk assessment of those transaction cycles are, and then it goes on to say what the audit response is. Now, what we're really doing here is we're auditing horizontally to make sure that governance controls are in place and that the control and policy areas of the council are in place and working. And then where we think there's a high risk, we do what we call a deep dive audit, so substantive testing audit. So we audit horizontally, and then we deep dive where we think there is a risk and do a substantive testing approach. So you can see in a kind of a pyramid way, we'll look at the strategies and context, and then we'll look again at the controls and governance and policies and processes, and then we deep dive down to transaction level. And that's how the audit comes together to enable us to put an opinion. So one of the things the Audit Committee ought to have a view on really is whether or not you think we've got that risk assessment broadly right, or whether there's anything that you might expect us to have done that's not in there, either in our response to some of the performance, governance, or indeed financial risks that might be on your minds, that we're not either not planning to do any work in or planning to do limited work in. Probably I'll stop there to see if there's anything in relation to that.
Well, of course, you see all the work of this committee, including the areas where we have concerns. One, for example, we're discussing today is debtor collection, so you're well aware of the anxiety levels on some of the topics within Midlothian. Is there any aspect in which your audit approach is changing in this document compared to the way you've approached the challenge in previous years?
One of the areas is around, for example, welfare reform, where we're looking a little bit at how the council is responding to that, and you can see that actually coming through the arrears element. So part of what might explain some of the arrears, say on rents, for example, may reflect some of the welfare reform changes that are going through. So one of the areas that we looked at last year and we're following up this year is how's the council responding to that, and then how's it managing that. The other area that we're looking at is a higher risk area. We looked at it last year, but again we're looking at it this year in a bit more details around write-offs and bad debt provisions. So you can see in our strategy, provisions is a higher risk area. We're also looking at write-offs. And one of the areas we're looking at is, do these look appropriate? Is the correct amount in place? What's happening in relation to the debt management system? And we would report on that in due course. And just finally from me, one of the things we wouldn't seek to do is to repeat the work of internal audit. So if internal audit have looked at these controls, their findings I thought were quite strong in relation to them, and we would seek to rely on that work where we could.
Further questions?
Just to continue through, we highlight on page 13 what we call reasonably possible risk. These are the higher areas where we intend to do more work. So you can see operating expenses, employee remuneration, welfare expenditure that I mentioned, and the housing revenue account. Again, we're linking into the issues that we've just talked about. There is the group audit scope, which is the issue raised by Councillor Bryant. And as you can see, there is a significantly reduced group structure within the council. It just means there's simply less to go around. In relation to material elements. The one thing that's not in there, which I think probably should be, is loading buses. So I think the council has a 5% share. For some reason that slipped out. It's still a non-material element of the council's accounts. We then move on to governance, which is on page 16, and we're looking at the annual governance statement and governance arrangements, particularly around community planning partnerships and following the public pound, which are the areas we think will be important in risk management. Performance and best value is set out on page 17. It's also, I think there's a page at the very end which is slipped, I think, in numbering. So major capital investment in councils and national studies. So we'll be doing some follow-up work there. That's on page 21 of your pack, but actually I think should probably fit into page 18 in the cycle. We intend to page 18 sets out the logistics, and you can see, I guess, for this committee, the 31st October is the date that I'd said we would produce our annual plan by. And then the audit fee is on page 19, and the external audit fee this year, I think, is held. Gary might be able to help me there. I think it's held at the same rate as we did for last year, so a no inflation adjustment for the council. I don't really have anything to add in relation to the plan, but happy to take any questions.
Silence implies assent. Thank you very much indeed.
Sorry.
Now we can tackle...
Peter?
Councillor Blake.
One of the things that would be so useful to have in this whole paper is also a kind of health warning that you as auditors could give to us of things that we have to really be aware of. I mean, whether it involves the fact that we are getting an ever-increasingly older population. This will also have very great impact on our finances, and other things that are likely to catch us from behind. I was impressed by your deep diving analogy. I was wondering if it had anything to do with the North Sea, but here we are in the real world where things are changing quite dramatically, and it would probably be very helpful if there would be a page on things that we ought to be aware of and we should look out for.
I'll just answer that. I think in relation, you're right, it's not there, but it's there in a non-explicit way, and maybe that's unhelpful. But if you look at page 5, there is a section called Assurance and Improvement Plan, and this is the local area network of scrutiny bodies that do an annual risk assessment of the council. Now, this risk assessment, whilst it's annual, is very forward-looking. And actually, the assurance and risk plan that we do, which would come before this committee in due course, covers areas like demographic challenges, for example, financial challenges, legislative challenges, and it covers in detail, because it's a cross-scrutiny body, You get the Housing Inspectorate on that, the Education Inspectorate, the Social Work Inspectorate and so on. So actually it's a much more holistic risk assessment of the Council. And in a sense it's got much more operational impact in relation to how the scrutiny bodies see the risks that the Council is running and how well they're responding to it. So in due course that's something to pay attention to, and maybe I should have highlighted that a bit more clearly.
I think it's also the case that the risk register is being subject to a major revision within the Council, and this will be something that we will be trying to integrate with the work of the Audit Committee. So these factors will be well aired in going forward for Midlothian Council. Can we move now to item 7, Treasury Management? Unfortunately, with the cancellation of the January meeting, I think this has already been to the Council. But it would be very apposite if we had a bit of a debate on it here.
Thank you, Chair. The Treasury Management Report covers 3 areas. The first of these is the Treasury Management Strategy for the forthcoming financial year. The second is the Annual Investment Strategy for the same period. And the third is the Capital Plans and Prudential Indicators, both the actual figures for 2012-13 and also the forecasts of these indicators for 13-14 and for the forthcoming 3 financial years. The table at the top of the second page of the report, this summarises the Council's capital plans for both the General Services and the HRA account and the impact that these capital plans have on the Council's underlying need to borrow. In terms of the borrowing strategy for 2014-15, new long-term borrowing from the PWLB is expected to sit somewhere between 3.5% and just north of 4%, whilst temporary borrowing from the money markets is expected to remain at rates of below base. If rates remain at these levels, we'd expect that temporary borrowing and some utilisation of temporary borrowing within the Council's overall loan portfolio would continue to offer the most cost-effective solution to the Council. In terms of the investment strategy, the recommended list of permitted investments is included as Appendix 1. There are no changes proposed from the 13-14 strategy. In terms of the prudential indicators, these relate to actual historic outcomes from 2012-13, together with the forecast outcomes as we move forward. These are listed as Appendix 2. In terms of the query that was raised earlier regarding the council tax indicator on page 45 of the report, you're absolutely right. The indicator is showing a reduction in council tax, but that indicator is looking solely at the impact from the council's capital plans on the council tax. It's not looking at the wider revenue budget as a whole, and that obviously needs to be brought into account as well.
So a somewhat theoretic position.
Well, it's looking solely at the impact from capital, and the report outlines that is the case. And as I say, it does obviously need to look at the wider impact from revenue. And at that point, I'll pause, and I'm happy to take any questions.
My understanding, this is largely an extension of the policy that we looked at and agreed last year. There's an element of overfunding the requirements of the council, partly because things like developer contributions can't be exactly depended upon to arrive at a given time. To some extent, that therefore involves a little bit of overfunding, and therefore there's a carry risk that if interest rates shot up rapidly, we'd have a lot of exposure to additional interest burden. Do we take advice as to how to mitigate that? How material a risk do we think it could be?
You're absolutely right. We take advice from our Treasury Management advisors who are Capita Asset Services, and they provide interest rate forecasts for the forthcoming financial year and the 3 financial years beyond that. We will assess the projected movement in those interest rates as we move forward, and will formulate our borrowing strategy in line with that.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarification, the table you referred to at the top of page 38, Am I right in assuming that the penultimate line saying underlying need to borrow, that is the amount we're borrowing on the capital account after taking into account repayments on previous borrowing?
That is correct. If you look at that table for 13-14, for example, we've got £44 million of expenditure this financial year. We've got just under £30 million of available external financing, together with just short of £7 million of principal debt repayment. So that's the element of historic expenditure that we're paying for this financial year, as you referred to. So that gives an underlying need to borrow for the capital plan purposes of £24.5 million for this financial year.
Thank you for that. It does seem rather unsustainable then if we continue to, if that figure is greater than the level of inflation compared to how much we actually borrow, and therefore in real terms it's staying the same. It looks rather unsustainable to have figures of 20,000.
If you have a look at the prudential indicators for affordability on page 45, you can see the ratio of financing costs for both the General Services Capital Plan and the HRA Capital Plan as a percentage of the net revenue stream for both of these accounts. So you can see for General Services it's remaining fairly flat, although there is a slight upward movement over the next 3 financial years, whereas for HRA the figure is going up over the next 3 financial years, but that's reflected in the overall rent agreement strategy.
Right, sorry to come back on this again. So we're saying that the bulk of that really is the housing. All right, that's reassuring. Thank you.
When we talk of cost of capital, that is the interest burden associated with our borrowings.
Yes.
So maybe the issue for all of us is the sustainability of the capital repayments and the ability to, as debt is repaid, to raise fresh credit in the markets.
Chair, alongside the Treasury Management Report being considered at Council in February, we took a capital strategy report, which in effect capped the external the borrowing that is the borrowing burden on the General Services account, and that's really in recognition of the financial climate we're in. So the decisions that Council made at that point capped the level, and that's why you see the rate, the percentage on the table on page 45 staying reasonably static. There is a spike in 16-17, and that's just specifically for the impact of the New Battle High School replacement. I don't know if that helps. Happy to bring that, to share that report with you, Chair. You'd probably find it quite interesting reading.
Yeah, I'd like that very much. The big picture is the indebtedness of the Council has risen quite sharply from a relatively low level compared to other Scottish local authorities. And my impression, of course, you can never tell, is that after New Battle, there isn't a great deal of capital expenditure lying out in sort of 4, 5, 6 years hence. So we will come to a plateau, and we will have, to some extent, borrowed at historically low interest rates.
Yeah, the capital strategy report that I talked about really imposes that plateau on the Council in terms of keeping debt at a sustainable level.
Can we accept this report? NEMCOM, thank you very much. Risk Management Quarters 2 and 3, item 8.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide the Audit Committee with 2013 Quarter 2 and 3 update and following review by service managers and heads of service. From the table presented at 2.1, it's clear to see the risk profile at the opening of 2013-14 for the Council. The current headline report indicates the highest risks facing the Council are recorded as balancing budgets in future years, impact on budget cuts and financial strength of the Council, together with corporate change and transition, legal and regulatory compliance and the Welfare Reform Act. As it stands at present at the end of Quarter 3, the risk profile for the Council remains unchanged as of beginning of Quarter 1, with 1 low risk, 6 medium risks, 4 high risks, but no critical risks at present. In relation to the 11 corporate risks facing the Council, there are 76 related actions to be undertaken. Of the 76 actions, 5 are due for completion during 2014. Progress made to date by the Council officers in relation to these can be summarised as 57 complete, 5 actions are progressing as planned, 10 not yet complete with an additional timescale, and 4 actions no longer relevant and therefore being cancelled. A few notes. So no overall change to the risk profile of the corporate risk profile to the organisation, and the progress and actions appears to be largely positive across the corporate risk area. The report also presents a summary of high and critical risks facing the Council. A number of service risks have been identified. Just to provide some context for Audit Committee. So clearly through the year it's been apparent that we've had issues facing the organisation with public service network connectivity. That's contained within the Corporate Risk Register, and the actions arising from that are highlighted in Appendix 2. There's also a reference made to review and collection performance of the Council, and again the actions being taken by the service to ameliorate this risk are contained within Appendix 2. There are, however, some risk areas that have been identified where service action plans need to be identified, and that's something that has been picked up as part of the review of risk management within the organisation. Previously reported to the Audit Committee, it was highlighted that the Council would undertake a review of the Council's risk management approach. That's now concluded, and the report's been presented back to the Council management team. In essence, the report stated that there's a need to make some amendments to the current approach, whereby the risk management process aligned more closely with the service planning process, and that will pick up on items discussed previously in relation to addressing items coming through from local area networks, as these items are taken into account as part of the service planning process, and as such the risks facing the organisation can be adequately identified at that stage, and reassurance given to corporate management team and audit committee that these risks have been highlighted and that appropriate actions are being taken. Happy to pause there and take any questions.
So if I understand correctly, this is work in progress and many of the schedules will be progressively filled with action plans.
Yeah, the plan at this stage now is to go back with the new head of service structure now, realign the Council's service risk registers and ensure that the risk registers that are in place within services accurately reflect the service objectives set by the Council through the Council plan, and that as part of that process the Council has identified the issues coming through from the LAN and so on, and that appropriate actions are identified to mitigate these issues.
Councillor Bryant.
I have two questions, Chair. The first one is clarity on paragraph 2.7, the last sentence there. The value of LA error and admin delay. And it goes on to speak about subsidies. If I could have a wee bit of clarity on that, please.
This is the reported from the service and revenues, and it was identifying that there was a need for a potential additional subsidy for the Council of £145,000 based on the costs associated with this item. To provide further detail, I would need to get further information from the appropriate head of service and report back.
Just to help clarify, my understanding is that the process of the DWP subsidy claim is that when a certain type of error gets above a certain threshold, there is a loss of subsidy. My understanding is, since this report was written, I'm speaking to Gary's colleague, Grace Scanlon, who's been doing a lot of work on the subsidy claim for us, is that we've managed to avoid that what would have been a penalty effectively in terms of the DWP subsidy. so that risk has been mitigated against and won't arise.
And my second question, on page 100, the table, under the Welfare Reform Act, it was my understanding that the government is giving funds to mitigate the effect of Welfare Reform Act, and I just wonder if all this dialogue here is actually relevant. Will the Welfare Reform Act impact it, or will it not?
I suppose I'll just add, at this point, this report provides an update up till the end of Q3, but there's been some changes since Q3, now that we're into Q4, and there's maybe been some further movement on this.
Yeah, in terms of the specifics and additional funding, the principal element that's come has been additional support for discretionary housing benefit payments. Now, whilst these can offset some of the impact on tenants of the changes on welfare reform and the benefits, they don't go anywhere near offsetting the full impact. So that the impact of welfare reform on individual tenancy still remains a big issue for tenants and us as a council in terms of a landlord responsibilities.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to turn into the headline report and corporate risk, I think it's encouraging the trend across the majority of reducing risk. However, if I could turn attention to page 98, balancing budgets in future years, where original scores increased from 14 to 18, yet the commentary is talking about financial strategy in December, addresses the gap and so on. So, to me, the commentary there doesn't necessarily reflect the increased risk that we're looking at there, and is there a reason for that?
I think, Chair, again, the report's written as at the Q3, and its members will be aware that on 4th of February we brought the financial strategy forward. It really sets out where we are in terms of the current position. So in some respects, this report should have been at the Audit Committee in January, so it is in some respects in that regard outdated. We'll bring forward the Q4 report and we'll do an assessment of where we feel we are in terms of delivery of the elements of the financial strategy which are crucial to balancing future years' budgets.
Councillor Baxter.
So just clarify then, are you saying that because I think Councillor Thompson's question was that the risk scores don't match the comment, are we saying that the risk scores are more up to date than the comment?
I think it's the risk score as at that point back in December was reflective of where we were then as a council. And that's again also reflected in the report from Grant Thornton earlier around the actions arising. What we've seen through there in late last year through into council meeting on the 4th of February is the development and approval by council of financial strategy, which goes a long way to setting out the journey that we need to take as an organisation to mitigate against the risk of having unbalanced budgets and the issues that come with that materialising. So I think we'll see that as I won't preempt the risk assessment that will be done as we move to Q4, but I would expect that risk score to reduce. There will still be further work to do, and that further work is about delivering the savings and delivering what we've said and agreed in the financial strategy. But you know, the risk score I would expect to see come down.
And the other one I wanted to pick up on was on page 99, the legal and regulatory compliance, and clearly the impact of PSN and the changes around that have been significant, and I don't think it can go without noting the significant additional workload that has been caused by the imposition of the new regulations around this. I think it's appropriate to see the risk score here increasing, because clearly not only is there an impact from the simple machinery point of view, is the potential impact, as we mentioned when we discussed at Council on productivity, the number of staff who may have formerly been able to do work at home when in their own time who now can't. So I think it's really important that we do continue to keep an eye on this, because that could be a significant impact that wouldn't necessarily be measured under a normal circumstance.
something for us to monitor on an ongoing basis. Thank you again for that overview, and move on to the internal audit plan.
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to present the draft internal audit plan for 2014-15, to explain how the plan was developed and to seek Audit Committee's input and approval of the plan. We created an audit universe detailing all of the Council's core processes and systems and populated this with information from various sources such as risk registers, previous audit work, discussions with all heads of service, including the Section 95 officer, and a review of the quarterly performance reports. From this, we created a plan which focused mostly on the higher risk areas, Council priorities and a sample of core processes and systems. This will ensure that audit resources allocated to high risk areas in the Council, but also allowing the audit manager to conclude on the governance, risk management and controls more generally. The plan is fluid and can be adapted to accommodate any escalation of risk coming to light through the risk management process. The plan was discussed with the Council's external auditors, the corporate management team and the Chair of the Audit Committee. Once approved, the plan will be discussed with the East Lothian Council's internal audit team to establish any joint audit opportunities. And the Audit Committee is invited to review and approve the internal audit plan for 2014-15 and to note that reports on progress with the plan will be submitted to the Audit Committee on a regular basis. Thank you.
Thank you again. This is the schedule set out with, you're going to be busy, I think, for the next 12 months by the looks of things. Any comments?
Just to ask, what were the sort of main factors in determining the number of days allocated for each area?
We allocated 40 days for the risk management audits because the majority of the audit we wanted to be risk-based, so we wanted to focus more on that aspect, but we still have to do the sort of core processes as well, and we're intending to do a bit like Gary described, a kind of governance review of controls and less of a deep dive kind of type audit, which is why we only allocated 20 days for the core processes, and then that should still enable us to produce our annual assurance statement, because we'll have covered enough of the Council's core processes and systems to be able to do that.
Councillor Bryant.
On page 132, under internal audit resource, you're saying it equates to a total of approximately 785 days. Is that a misprint?
No. That's basically the working days in the financial year, and multiplied that by the number of people we have, which is 3.7, and then we reduced that by items such as management, professional development, holidays, and that was basically what we had left, and we divided that into the audit plan to come up with the items that we have.
From time to time we have internal audit reports required on a sort of emergency basis when unexpected problems arrive. Have you got enough spare capacity if that were to happen in the next 12 months? We obviously established a protocol at the tail end of last year for those occasions.
We've allocated estimated that there would be about 4 investigations of 40 days each, because they usually are quite lengthy pieces of work. And we also have allocated 30 days for 3 years of work for consultancy type activities, which are not as detailed as an investigation. But if we exceed that budget, then we will have to think about perhaps postponing some audits, or we will provide regular updates to the Audit Committee to let you know how things are going there, whether we have to rejig things. But the plan is supposed to be fluid, so if there are escalations of risks, then we will try and bring them on and reassess what's on the plan and perhaps move something down the list of priorities.
So those 4 slots, the investigations, item 19, they haven't been allocated yet?
No, not yet.
Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. Going on from that, if the worst comes to the worst, if you have maybe long-term sickness or something, and so you use up all that contingency, is this list prioritised so that you take the higher priority ones first in that situation, or is it the case that you just take them chronologically according to how they've been set out?
At the moment, it is scheduled per quarter, and that's taken into account the availability of the area that we were planning to assess, and any audits that we're finishing off just now, which we're going to go back and look at next year. Some of those audits we obviously wouldn't want to do until Q4 next year. It would be too soon. But if anything like that happened, we would have to reassess the priorities of work, and also take into account any escalation of risks. So these items could be moved around if an area, say, arrears became a serious concern for us. We could bump that up the plan and move something else down into that quarter.
Thank you, Elaine. I think we move on to actually quite a related topic, which is the external assessment of our internal audit function. Graham?
Thank you very much. The public sector internal audit standards require that internal audit is externally assessed at least every 5 years. There are basically two ways of achieving this. One is an external assessment through the IIA, SIPFA, or an external audit firm. And we've had that costed at around £6,000 to £9,000. Or alternatively, we can take part in the scheme suggested by the local authority chief internal audit group, where the audit section would be assessed by another local authority audit team. The chief internal audit group would oversee this process and provide quality assurance. The second option would not give rise to a direct cost. This paper therefore recommends consideration of the second option. We have discussed the paper with the chair of the audit committee and the chief executive, and now refer to the audit committee for review and comment. Thank you.
Presumably, if we take the services of another council's audit department to do the audit of us, we have to reciprocate and give up some of our time to do it for them or for somebody else in the loop.
Yes, that's the case, and I think there would probably be a commitment of 2 or 3 days training, and then probably about 5 days to actually undertake the assessment. But there is a benefit in that as well, in that obviously our internal audit team would be able to benchmark ourselves against that other audit team.
So some sort of cross-fertilisation of best practice might be a byproduct.
Yes, that's right.
I guess you've kind of labelled us option A, going with another council's staff and saving the professional expenses, with all due respect. Is that the case?
Yes, that was certainly one of the aims, was to try and obviously save the council money. I guess we as an internal audit team would be happy with either an external assessment or this scheme recommended by the Chief Internal Audit Group. The quote was obtained by the Chief Internal Audit Group through the IIA, but we also asked Grant Thornton for an idea of what their fees would be, and I think Grace came back and indicated it would be a very similar charge.
Chair, the reason I ask is we are required as part of the audit rotation process. So every 5 years the external audit is rotated, and it may not be Grant Thornton, it could be any, and at that point in the first year of audit the external auditor is required to do an independent assessment of internal audit, because we may be relying on their work for future years, and then we just follow that up every year. So it may simply, you may be able to rely on that work, whoever the auditors are of the council, and we would build that, any auditor builds that into the fee range that Audit Scotland set as part of the mandated approach under the Code of Audit Practice.
Will it cost us or will it not?
So it's part of the fee range that you're required to do the council audit in would incorporate all of the requirements of the audit. I'll give you an example of how this works in practice. So this year we are undertaking a review mandated by Audit Scotland into managing capital projects as part of the mandated costs. And the last year we weren't doing that, but we don't charge any additional fee for that. We would take each year as it comes in relation to the guidance that Audit Scotland issue. So it would be incorporated into the fee, but that would be within a fee range which is agreed and set with the council and would be agreed by notify the council each year. But it's I mean, there may well be other advantages from going with Sludge Act. It's simply to say that.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think, there's possibly some merit in looking a bit more at that, but I can see some additional benefits of participation in the Chief Auditor's Group scheme, because you do get the benefit of that experience within another council environment, the interaction with the other internal audit teams. I can see some real benefits of that. I mean, clearly it would be other councils who would be benefiting more from having the benefit of our team going into to work with them. But no, I think that level of and the ability to benchmark would be very useful.
Yeah, I sense we may not have the full landscape as level as it could be if it's possible that our own auditors would supply this as part of the overall audit quote. But you've obviously had a separate quotation for the work.
Yes, we did. As I say, we did approach Grant Thornton just for a quote. We weren't aware that it could be incorporated as part of their normal work. So, as I say, we as a team don't have a strong preference, although there is that additional thing that was mentioned just in relation to benchmarking ourselves.
How urgent is it to take a decision today?
Basically, there's a Chief Internal Audit Group on Friday, and I think they're looking for feedback from councils about whether they'd be interested in participating in the scheme. And it depends on the numbers that say yes. If they're sufficient, then the proposal will go ahead, and if there isn't, it will terminate. So I guess what we were hoping today was to indicate whether we would be happy to proceed on that basis, or if we're going to go the external audit route.
Yeah, I'm just slightly uneasy of making a decision now when Grant Thornton's position may be actually more subtle than was initially the case.
I'd simply point out that if you look at the recommendations, actually the Audit Committee has been asked to note the proposal. You're not being asked for a decision per se. I mean, I'm sure that members of the audit team will consider the discussion, perhaps indeed have a separate discussion with Grant Thornton, and that could be done prior to the Friday's meeting, which Graham refers to. But as an audit committee, you're actually being asked to note the proposal that we would go with this proposal that involves our audit team working in another council and vice versa. And as has been said and noted on various sides, that does also have some additional kind of training and building knowledge benefits for our audit team. So that's you're being asked to note rather than come to a decision as an audit committee.
Thank you for that clarification, in which case I think we just note it and proceed to work with our colleagues in other local authorities accordingly. Item 11, National Fraud Initiative. Kevin was at the head of this, but Gary's going to talk to it.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. The report provides committee with an update on progress and the outcomes of the 12-13 National Fraud Initiative. And members will recollect that's a counter-fraud exercise which is led by Audit Scotland and really uses data matching to compare information about a number of individuals across and their interaction in the public sector to identify matches where there might, and I would stress might, suggest evidence of fraud or error. The table on page 144 of the agenda in section 5.1 highlights the summary position in terms of those matches. So we had 1,668 matches, of which nearly 1,200 were cleared where there was no issues. A number are still in the process of being checked through, and 46 closed after investigation, with 428 others and 26 insurance claims others. The notes against the table give members detail. So it's a position statement on where that's to progress to at the moment, so you have visibility over the impact and the number of matches. And we'll bring a report back to committee in June, which will give a sort of final position in terms of the 12-13 National Fraud Initiative. And we'll also start to see the reports coming forward for the the 13-14 work in due course. It is an ongoing programme. Happy to pause there and take any questions members may have on NFI.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, obviously there's still work being undertaken in a number, but such as the benefit fraud case, is there anything from that that suggests need to enhance our own processes, or is it largely the fact that we've uncovered this shows that the system works and that we've uncovered that it was fraud?
You appreciate my day job isn't benefit, so I would be reluctant to give you too much of an answer there, but I'm sure if there are any lessons to be learned, then that Ken and Kevin have taken those on board and will reflect them in the business processes that we operate. But I could get them to come back on that specific case if you would like, in terms of brief you on that.
It did seem to me that on this matching technique, we haven't picked up very much benefit fraud. It's perhaps surprising, but the blue badges was the other way. Are we assured that abuse of blue badges can be reduced in the future?
Again, I'm not an expert on the issuing and the rules around blue badges, but I'm sure that, again, the team will have taken on board any lessons that can be learned in terms of our business process and how we award them or remove them. Again, happy to ask the relevant officer to come back to yourself.
It looks like a basic question of people dying and the badges then getting passed around the family or something.
Chair, this is a national problem, so it almost doesn't matter which council you look at across the UK. This happens, and I think it's something to do with the national scheme, and I do know that it's been looked at a national level. So eventually I think councils will fall into line with that.
So there is a conduit that we will receive the national advice as to how to tighten this scheme up. Okay. Can we move now to the anti-money laundering policy?
Thank you, Chair. The purpose of this report is to provide the Audit Committee with the opportunity to comment on a proposed anti-money laundering policy before submission to Cabinet for approval. Money laundering means exchanging money or other assets obtained criminally for money or other assets that are clean and don't have an obvious link with any criminal activity. It also includes money that's used to fund terrorism, however it's obtained. SIPFA's view is that it is good practice for all public sector organisations to put in place appropriate and proportionate anti-money laundering safeguards and reporting arrangements to enable them to detect and avoid involvement in crimes described in the legislation. SIPFA considers there is a substantial reputational risk for an authority which does not have adequate anti-money laundering policies and procedures in place. Therefore, an anti-money laundering policy has been prepared which provides guidance to staff on the types of transactions that could raise suspicion. It includes a form that employees can use to report their concerns to the Council's Money Laundering Reporting Officer, who is the head of Finance and Integrated Service Support. The policy has been reviewed by an external legal firm and has been passed to the trade unions for comment. The Audit Committee is invited to review the policy and recommend its submission to Cabinet. Thank you.
Okay, so we must have a policy in this area, as many financial institutions do. Any comments on the particular way we're going about it? All good housekeeping. Thank you very much indeed, Elaine. Councillor Thompson.
It's just on training. I mean, I know that the policy outlined here does cover off the how-to, but I was thinking of introducing a wider level of basic training to staff on what to look out for.
I understand that there's training sessions Wednesday mornings, and I think this is going to form part of that training process.
Thank you for that. And on we move to our old friend, fuel management, page 171. John.
Thanks, Chair. This report updates committee on additional controls established relating to the Council's plant and vehicle non-diesel fuel usage. The background is set out in Section 2 and additional controls are listed in Section 3 on page 171. Also, I can advise committee, as noted at the top of page 172, the configuration of the Council's vehicle and plant fleet has changed and the usage of LPG and petrol via garage forecourts has reduced over the years and continues to do so. Chair, committee are asked to note the controls as set out in this report. Thank you.
So the amount of cash at risk anyhow has reduced almost halved because of the change in the fleet, plus the bad lad that was involved in this is no longer with us. Is that correct? Councillor Milligan.
Yeah, Peter, maybe I'm missing something here, but I'm finding this actually astonishing that we now have 96 fuel cards and we've got 7 vehicles that require filling, unless I'm reading it wrong. You've just pointed out we've got 5 vehicles that are fuelled with unleaded and 2 that are fuelled with liquid petroleum gas. But my big understanding is that the mass majority of this fraud was actually to do with people filling jerry cans and disappearing with them rather than them going to the right place.
Yeah, but you still require the fuel card to get the vehicle for, the jerry can to fuel the plant. So that's why there's been an increase in the number of cards, because there used to be multiple cards used by a number of officers, my understanding.
And the problem was we couldn't pin who had been using the card at any given point in time, and now we can. But I do share some concern that these seem to be a remarkably high number relative to the size of the fleet.
Yeah, Peter, I think the reality, John, and help me if I'm wrong here, but take the 7 vehicles away to the side, because each of the drivers of that will have a card. If you take that away, you're still left with 85 card holders to go and fill jerry cans for lawnmowers and stuff like that. I can't see why you need anything like that. I would have thought you'd have had 1 or 2 people who would be responsible for making sure that jerry cans at certain garages were topped up in their usages and were right. But we now seem to have this enormous amount of people with these cards. And I come back to the point, I didn't think the big problem, I think it was part of the problem is you couldn't identify who had drew fuel. But my understanding is that the biggest part of the theft was effectively folk filling jerry cans quite legitimately, taking them up and putting them in storage, and other people taking the jerry cans and disappearing with them and either filling their motors up or selling them. How does any of these levels at all control any of that theft?
In terms of the facts, we have a significant amount of non-vehicle plant. We've got a lot of equipment. In terms of the 96 fuel cards, as I've already indicated, it was identified to each individual driver. So in terms of the issue, what I think I'll do for committee is I'll go and have a look at the plant usage by individual and tie it back and come forward with additional details. I was hoping one of my co-authors was going to be here today, but it's been diverted. I don't know if you can add anything, Graham.
No, I can't add anything to that, so we need to find out.
Yeah, I would say if we can reduce the pool of people who really do never have a need for these cards, so much the better.
Peter, probably I'm maybe badly making the point here, but I would have genuinely thought that a company, a landscape company, wouldn't have every driver that had a couple of lawnmowers on his trailer with a card to fill jerry cans to then fill that kind of machinery. I would have thought that kind of stuff would have been held reasonably central at different depots, either Stob Hill or Pennycook, and you would get what you needed in the morning to take with you to use whatever machinery you were using. We're talking about lawnmowers and stuff like that. We're not talking about massive big, we're not talking about filling tractors here or anything like that. It is rotavators, lawnmowers, stuff like that, and strimmers and stuff like that. So it's no big massive petrol uses. And I would have thought that there would have been somebody would have held that stuff centrally, whether in one or two depots, and that as you were leaving the depot in the morning, that you would sign off with your supervisor what fuel you were taking for what you were going to do, because there's nobody actually answering this question. I thought the big theft here was people just lifting these jerry cans. So it would be okay if Derek Milligan goes in with his car, fills 2 jerry cans and puts them in his back of his trailer. That doesn't do anything for the security. If Joe Smith walks along at the back and lifts them off the back of the trailer and disappears away up the road with them. So I would have thought this stuff would need to be held centrally if we were going to have any serious control over it.
Okay, we'd better have a report back and get further and better particulars. Thank you. Councillor Bryant.
I just wonder what controls there are on the actual diesel pumps at the various depots. I mean,
we touched on that before. I mean, diesel, of course, is much higher consumption,
yeah.
And there are security cameras, I understand it, and they're all gated. John?
Yeah, there's individual fuel cards, there's PIN numbers, and there's also vehicle fobs, and it was covered in the previous report, which came to the Audit Committee back in October 2012.
And we've no reason to think there's any fraud happening on the diesel front.
There's controls in place. We've got enhanced reporting systems, so we know the consumption of fuel. I can't guarantee there'll be no fraud, but we've got more sophisticated systems to monitor the fuel. So, for example, bin vehicles, refuse vehicles, do about 6 mile to the gallon. So if we're doing 5 mile to the gallon, there's quite a bit of margin. But we have developed over the years, and we've been in this chamber on a number of occasions with reports on fuel management and control of fuel, and it's something as a management team we're really live to, particularly at the moment when fuel prices are up to about 130, 140 retail for diesel. So it's something that focuses us regularly.
Okay, thank you for that. We now move on to a significant report back on accounts receivable.
Thank you. This was a follow-up review of an internal audit undertaken in May 2012 on accounts receivable. The aim was to see whether the recommendations made in the report had been fully implemented. We found that improvements were still required in the way the Council manages collections. For example, allocation of appropriate resource, improvements to performance reporting, and improvements to the current collection system. Since we undertook the audit, the volume of debt outstanding has actually increased to 3.5 million. Management have agreed an action plan contained within the report, and issues raised are to be reviewed as part of the income maximisation transformation programme. So the Audit Committee is asked to note the agreed action plan, and the internal audit will undertake a full review in 2014-15. Thank you.
Okay, well, this is obviously quite serious. So we've got 1.66 million rising of debt that's over 12 months old.
It's 1.8 at the moment.
Risen to 1.8. 1.66 was the measure in 2011, I think. Yes. And that's despite a write-off of 300,000.
Yes, there was that write-off, and also, as I say, since we actually did this audit, which was in October, from October to February, there was another write-off of about £100,000.
What systemic reasons do you think underpin this poor collection record?
We believe that there's probably a lack of central resource for arrears collection. A lot of the collection activity is actually out with services, and obviously services are under pressure and don't sometimes have the necessary expertise in collection. So one of the recommendations is that there's a central resource, and that a particular senior manager takes responsibility for accounts receivable, and also that collections performance is routinely reported to the Performance Review and Scrutiny Committee and possibly the Audit Committee as well.
lot of very sensible proposals here to improve the structure and the effectiveness of debtor collection here. Is there any particular area of the Council's activities that is badly affected?
There tend to be a number of areas that have got quite high levels of debt. These include things like rechargeable repairs, accommodation charges, care at home, homeless costs, estate management, housing overpayments, non-domestic waste. So I think, although there are sort of pockets of fairly material outstanding debt, we believe that improvements are needed across the Council, which is why we've recommended the central team, which would also allow central expertise to be built up in terms of how to collect.
Surely we should proceed on the lines you indicate, but nevertheless, there are likely to be historic debts which are sailing towards being provided for and then written off, and therefore there may within this number be a substantial impact on the Council's revenue account. When will it be possible to quantify that?
I think we understand that the majority of debt over 1.8 million, over 12 months, is fully provided for. The parts that aren't are what they call good debtors, which is with debt with other local authorities or utility companies, which hopefully we'll get back.
Part of your proposal is to try and formalise the procedure to go into provision and then to go into write-off, and that strikes me as being quite weak at the moment by standards of commercial businesses.
I think there is certainly debt obviously being pushed through to write-off, but probably an exercise does need to be undertaken just to review how much more needs to feed through. So we're basically starting with a cleaner book.
Councillor Muirhead.
Yeah, what we're not hearing here is, given that previous internal audit review highlighted the issue way back in 2011, or it was based on the figures for 2011, and proposed a number of actions be taken, and it's indicating here that not all the recommendations suggested by internal audit have been fully adopted. And what I'm not hearing is why that is the case. I mean, it's indicating that there's resource issues and things like that, but when we get this kind of thing before the audit committee, I would expect to hear some background to that, not for the auditors, but from the officers responsible for the services involved, to say why they haven't implemented the suggestions or the improvements that were recommended by the audit review way back then.
So a call for a gap analysis. Kenneth, perhaps you'd like to comment.
Yes, I mean, what I can't do is give you kind of root and branch explanation of exactly which were picked up and which weren't, but this is something which has, I suppose, been an ongoing cause for concern for me, and particularly given our financial position. I think also the wider risks which are associated with the Council being seen as a soft touch in terms of debt. And, Graham has spoken about some of the particular areas, and, that was quite an extensive list where we have a significant issue here. So it's undoubtedly the case that in terms of the systems we've had in place, they have not served us well. And that's, certainly when I was talking to colleagues in audit and when we spoke about this at management level, that absolute need to have a much more robust and centralised approach, and to have a named responsibility rather than responsibilities being essentially dissipated across the organisation. And I suppose that whilst this isn't really an answer to your question, part of the problem, I think, with any audit action plan which hasn't been really thoroughly followed up, quite often, if there's a lack of clarity about absolutely where that responsibility lies, then that is undoubtedly a contributory factor. If there's a series of recommendations with a series of officers that have a shared responsibility for implementation. So I think that does tie us back to the absolute need to have a clear corporate lead on debt collection. So sorry, that doesn't deal with the historic aspect. I can't give you as I say, full details on that. But I think it's a kind of a generic issue about recommendations which are dissipated across a number of areas.
I take on board what you're saying. The thing is, though, when reports like this come up to the Audit Committee, and it is the case in, I think sometimes as well in the Performance Review Committee, when there are clearly indications that there are issues that, or recommendations that haven't actually happened, I don't think we should really be in a situation where any officers are saying to us, well, we'll come back to it at a later stage. I think preparation should be done. Officers should be looking at these reports, and when I ask a question as to why these actions haven't been carried out, I expect officers to be able to answer that here, because they should have looked at this and known that that kind of question is going to come up, because that's the kind of question we should be asking. So I think officers really need to pay more attention when there's things like this on the agenda, and put themselves in a position where they can give detailed answers to why these actions haven't taken place. I think that's really important, and I'd hope we didn't have that in future, because we should be getting the answers here.
That would lead to asking the functional heads of departments within the Council to create almost a second report in conjunction with internal audit, analysing why the previous measures had not been implemented. My suspicion is we could do that, but we would end up recommending exactly the sort of tough measures that have come forward from internal audit. And the key thing is the buy-in of the executive at the highest level to that debtor collection is a priority for this Council. We can't go out any further without imperiling our revenue account. In terms of the formal audit of the Council, are we very much worse than other councils in this department?
The answer is yes, actually. So if you look at page 190 in Appendix 2, which I thought was quite stark, there's something clearly going on at Midlothian, even between 2012 and 2013. So there's a gap there of about £800,000, and the average number of debtors is much smaller. So I suspect what we're going to be looking at here are things like council tax arrears and NDR arrears and housing rent arrears. But something is clearly going on at Midlothian, which I think is, I would say, more exceptional. Often we're seeing increases of around £200,000 at similar-sized councils. Here we're seeing an increase of £800,000. And I think that question you asked at the outset, Peter, around, well, what is it really that's... Do we understand really the causal links that are behind this? And I think some of them, I thought the internal auditor's response there was really quite sharp around some of the internal issues, but within the context of a recession and welfare reform.
Just to come back on Councillor Muirhead's point, 'cause I think that, and in fact I think this has also been said by the external auditors previously, is what as an audit committee I think you really don't want to see, certainly as Chief Executive I don't want to see, is issues that remain unresolved. And I think probably over certainly the period I've been here, over 4 years, there have been a number of issues that have come back to the audit committee, and they don't seem to have been resolved. And certainly this is an area of concern. This is partly why, in terms of the business transformation programme, we put in a particular focus on this whole area of income maximisation. So it is an area of weakness. And I took on board Gary's comments there, but also if you look at, in terms of a council which has improved most of its outcomes quite significantly over the last 4 or 5 years or so, it's notable to me that one of the areas where we're still relatively weak, for example, is council tax collection. So it's not, there's certainly an issue there. And I think that the lesson for me, from a kind of corporate perspective, and Councillor Muirhead will recognise this because it's one he used to bring up regularly, when our invoice payment used to be, we were one of the weakest councils in terms of invoice payment. I think the latest figures are that we're in the top quartile, or certainly very close to it. And that actually took a very clear corporate effort whereby people were held to account at the management team and elsewhere. We had figures coming forward on a regular basis. And we clearly need to do the same thing in terms of the income that we're bringing in. So, I mean, that was one point. And the other point was that in terms of repeat audits or areas of repeated concern, there is perhaps some merit in the report just identifying what these issues are. And then I agree that as a group of officers, we need to ensure that the relevant officers are here to be able to address the issues of concern that members might have.
Just to echo some of that, one of the issues we've raised as external auditors for Midlothian Council has been the pace of change. We've talked about that quite a lot, and one of the areas that gives us some concern in a broad sense, not really linked to this, although this might be a micro example of something like that, is how quickly the Council culturally and behaviourally responds to things. What's the culture and ethos of the organisation, and what's the pace at which it can respond and react? And we do have some concerns around that, and it's something that we've spoken quite a lot to the senior team about, and it is something we would look to see some change in going forward.
Councillor Thompson.
Yeah, I think just maybe a sort of fundamental point here is that when an action plan is agreed by this committee or any committee of the committee, I think the very least we can expect is for it to be implemented. And for parts of it not to be is not acceptable. And to have it, it's unfortunate, needn't have other reports coming back to say these are the areas where it's been missed. If this committee has agreed it should happen. And that should be the end of the story. And then we should be getting the outcomes off the back of that, not these are areas that we haven't done yet. I think that can't be any doubt about that. If an action plan is agreed, we expect it to happen.
I'm with you. We are where we are. And I think for me, the question is using up the internal audit limited time. It may be most profitable for us to diarise a follow-up from this report to see that the new impetus is having an effect on our debtor book and bringing, if necessary, the functional heads to this committee if there are particular areas of our activity as a council where we're still not getting acceptable payment patterns.
Yes, the report that I mentioned in next financial year will include a follow-up of these issues, but it will be a wider review as well because, as I say, this was just purely a follow-up of a previous report.
So maybe if we specify for that report an analysis of which areas of the Council's operations are particularly vulnerable and look in more depth at the reasons why there has been poor collection and, if necessary, have the heads of those areas take us through the problems that they've got so we can have some more creative solutions. Meanwhile, I think your proposals are very much in line with commercial best practice, and I'd like to see how they work. We adopt the report and look forward to hearing more next year on the progress on debtor recovery.